All right, so in this video, I'm going to do a couple things around the topic of fear. So first, I'm going to lay out what I see as the three-part structure of fear. Then I'm going to talk about how I see fear connecting to trauma and also to behavior. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about some techniques that I think are helpful and effective for essentially unraveling the structure of fear and allowing us to move gradually beyond fear into a state of more openness, more love, really being more present in the moment instead of being trapped in the past, which is what I think fear ultimately does to us and how it holds us back. Okay, so the three-part structure of fear, I'm going to draw it first, and then I'll go through an explanation. Let me see how my green comes through. Let me see if it's dark enough, okay? Yeah, hopefully that's dark enough. And so what I've drawn here essentially is, you can think of it as kind of like a spark or a star in the middle that's in red. Coiling around it in blue is kind of this serpent or spiral. Picturing here constriction, tightness, confinement. And then these are three disco balls. And so the disco balls for me represent evil. Why don't I go ahead and put fear up at the top here, kind of anchor my theme. Okay. So the green disco balls are evil. The blue coil is disbelief. And then that red in the middle is confusion. And so to understand how fear works, and again, this is based on a combination of what I've read and heard from other people, and also just my personal inner explorations and dealings with my own fear. That's how I came up with this model and kind of this breakdown of things. And essentially the way I see fear happening, fear arising in us, is we have ourselves at some point in our past, right? We could have been an infant, right? Say 6 months old. We could have literally been in the womb or just being born, right? Call that maybe 6 minutes old or something like that, right? We could have been 6 years old, or this could have been 6 minutes ago. And the way fear, I think, gets into us is some traumatic event happens, right? For example, say a 6-month-old or a 6-year-old may have encountered a scary dog or something like that, a big German Shepherd. They weren't expecting to see it. All of a sudden it's looking there, and they get almost this deathly fear that they're going to be harmed or killed by this animal. And what that does is it creates this emotion that arises within, and that's what I'm representing with this red star. Right? For the infant coming through, it may have been the trauma of childbirth. They may have been suffocating at some point, struggling, right? That could have created the fear. Us 6 minutes ago, we could have almost been in a car accident. We could have seen a look on, a look on the face of a loved one. I'm choking on, maybe my fear's coming up right now. A look on the face of a loved one that makes us think, oh my God, is that loved one still care about me? Do they like me? Maybe there's something in their tone or their words that give us this chill or this fear that maybe that person is harboring ill will toward us, something like that. And so whatever it is, some pain or sensation arises in us in response to something in our environment happening that scares us, right? Something that we don't want to see happen. We're worried about some catastrophic or scary outcome. And so there's a feeling that arises. But what often happens, right, we have this repression kind of built into our culture, into our conditioning, is we're feeling that, but we may think, you know what, I don't want to feel that right now. I don't want to deal with it. Maybe we feel like we're too in the moment, right? Things are moving too quickly. We don't have time to process it, or it's not safe to process it right now. We may not even know that you can process, right, these feelings through the heart. We may just think that what you're supposed to do is bury it down, again, because maybe that's what our role models did. Maybe that's what we've seen in movies. Maybe that's what society has taught us. And so instead of processing that pain through the heart in the moment, right? Allowing healing to occur. What we do is we keep that pain out of our heart and we bury it somewhere in our body, right? I know for me, I feel a lot of my fear trapped like kind of in my rib cage area. I also get a lot in my throat, kind of in the orbital area of my face, kind of in my sides, different places where what I think happened was at some point in the past, I had some trauma, right? Some scary event. I didn't process the energy through my heart. And so instead, I essentially kind of trapped it somewhere in my body. And I think that the way we do this, and again, we're doing it all subconsciously or unconsciously. I certainly didn't have a magic wand and order this to happen, is we essentially coil the body around it and essentially trap that feeling in that space. I'm picturing here almost kind of like nuclear waste, right, from a facility. You've got it in a tub and it's glowing green or something like that, and we're like, oh my God, what are we going to do with it? We got to bury it deep underground, pour 50 feet walls of concrete around it, seal it in some elaborate metal box, and then bury it under hundreds and hundreds of pounds of earth. That's kind of, I think, what we do inside of ourselves when we experience these traumas. We're not ready for them to go through the heart. And what I think we do is we, on a physical level, kind of trap it wherever we're feeling it. But I think on a more emotional level or psychological level, what we're doing is we're essentially coiling disbelief around it. And another word for this can be kind of reflexive denialism. We essentially just say, this is not happening, right? Or that didn't happen. And it can go in different directions, right? It can say, this feeling isn't happening inside of me. I'm not feeling this, right? Deny, 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 push, push, push. It can say, this event didn't happen, right? That's, I think, sometimes how we block out traumas. And so whether we're denying the event or we're denying the feeling, we're coiling around it with this disbelief, keeping it contained, keeping it separate from the rest of us, not allowing it to get to the heart where it may cause us to cry, right? Or it may cause us to maybe even remember past experiences where we felt this. This is the painful and difficult experience of processing those traumas, which for reasons unknown to us, we just didn't deal with in the past. And so now it's coiled up in our body. Again, this little sparking star of trauma, pain from the past that was never processed, wrapped inside this coil of disbelief. Now, when I use this word evil, I mean it in the normal sense, but I'm also trying to use a specific pattern here, which is the pattern that I see evil operating with, at least inside of me. And kind of the fancy way to say it is the insistent misattribution of suffering's cause. Right? The insistent misattribution of suffering's cause, which again is a kind of a fancy way of saying misdirecting, misleading, right? I'm kind of going in and I'm saying, hey, why am I suffering right now? And let me draw a little diagram here. If I'm sitting here and I have the question, like, why am I suffering, right? And let's say the truth is X, right? Evil, again, being this little disco ball, will redirect my gaze away from the true cause and divert it to a fake cause, right? Now notice, this isn't saying that this is the cause, right? It's taking my intention, which is to find out the root of my suffering, and it's giving me the wrong answer. I still ultimately make the choice of whether to pursue this or not. But why it's evil, right? It's essentially playing a deceptive game. It's playing on my wanting, and it's misdirecting my wanting towards something that's not actually going to give me what I want or what I'm looking for. It may actually be something that creates more fear and more suffering. And just a brief tangent from this, I think a lot of the evil in the world is actually a result of this very dynamic, right? We feel a suffering inside of us. We can tell that there's a disturbance, and so we go looking for the cause of it. And the truth, really, which I'll be getting into later, is X, which is going to direct us to go back inside of ourselves and do the healing work we didn't do before, right? I think that is, in a nutshell, the truth. But this will say, no. The cause of your suffering is, and then insert here whatever you hate, right? It's the Democrats or it's the Republicans, right? It's this person, it's that person, it's my parents, right? It's my spouse, it's my kids, it's my job, it's my boss, it's all those things. These are why I'm suffering, right? This is why I'm unhappy. This is why I can't move forward in my life. And evil will do this to us our entire life if we let it. And the tricky part is we can get high and we can get rushes of exhilaration and satisfaction pursuing that game, right, of chasing the boogeyman outside of ourselves, because we think we're doing the right thing. We think we're actually serving ourselves. And in the process of that, we can get some little whiffs of superiority, gotcha, right? Vengeance is a dish best served cold, right? We can get into all the drama of that, which can be captivating, can be exciting, can be thrilling, and can feel like it's progress toward a certain direction. But we find again and again, I mean, look at the dramas of history, look at Shakespeare, right? All these examples. If we're looking outside of ourselves for the boogeyman, if we're looking to change factors outside of ourselves to help address that deep inner troubling, that deep inner disturbance, we're not going to get anywhere. We're likely just going to be spreading our suffering around a lot of places, and then at the end of the day be no better off, may actually be worse off, because we've maybe re-traumatized ourselves with all that confusion, leaving more healing to be done. And so my belief is that if you think of an evil act in the world, right, think of the most horrific acts in history. Think of an act maybe you were personally involved in, either as the perpetrator or the victim. Think about examples of people you know. I really believe that anytime that we're directing our pain outward onto others, it's a result of this essential misdirection. We're looking for the cause of our suffering, but instead of seeing the truth and then following the truth, we're seeing it into some other boogeyman, some other external source, and then essentially crusading out in the world, kind of like Don Quixote, to fix it, not realizing that we were deluded from the start, and that anything we do down this road is not really going to deliver us what we really want, which is that healing within. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the structure of this in a little more detail, and I'm going to talk about some of the techniques we can use to actually, what I think, effectively address the healing instead of continuing to go around in circles and play the game. Okay, so when I believe this is something that applies to other people as well. That's why I'm putting it in a video. But I'm just going to use the first person because I only have direct information about what I myself experienced. So I'm going to talk about it from my own perspective in the hope that it provides some helpful information to you. When I go in and try to find my fear, right, my past trauma, and try to heal it, the first thing I find is that there's 3 different ways that evil's operating to try to deflect me away from effective healing. And so the first disco ball here is the disco ball I was kind of drawing over there, which is externalization. So again, the way this disco ball works is essentially it kind of plays on disbelief and confusion to get me to not even realize that the reason I'm upset is because there's something inside of me that's disturbed or difficult, right? It externalizes it. It says, no, it's that person's fault, right? No, it's that group of people's fault. No, it's me from the past, right? That past me, it's that past me's fault. And what I think we want to notice here, right? So I've got me, and then we've got you over here. Right? I've got this inner disturbance from my past. It's this inner disturbance, this energy, because it's trapped in there, and this is us, right? This is us. We're trapped, we're confined. I know I personally am claustrophobic. I don't know if that's maybe a bit of a metaphor and expression for this, but imagine you're like in a straitjacket, you're writhing around, you're coiled, you're confused, you don't know why you're trapped, right? This is creating that agitation and that disturbance, I think, inside of me. But by the time I'm experiencing consciously, it's kind of like fire and smoke. When it gets up to me, all I know is that I don't like what's happening. I'm upset about what's happening. Something's off, something's wrong. And then my brain immediately goes, okay, well, let's figure out what it is so we can address it, so we can fix it. And this is when that externalization disco ball kind of drops from the ceiling and starts spinning around. I start going, okay, well, where is the cause? And what I could picture here is myself, I maybe instinctively kind of look down toward the disturbance, but the disco ball of externalization is the first one that's sitting right there, and it directs my attention outward towards someone or something else, right? So I look down, maybe instinctively sensing, wow, is there something going on in me? And it's like, no, not you. Nothing wrong with you. It's them, right? It's that person, right? Or it's you from the past, or that person in the past, right? We find some boogeyman, we find some scapegoat, And essentially then because we're externalizing, we're no longer even looking in the right direction for our healing, right? We're actually abandoning ourselves again, right? This is calling out for healing. That twisting, that agitating inside is really, you could think of it almost maybe like a bird in its nest, and its wings are broken or something's wrong, it can't fly, and so it's chirping out, it's calling out like for its parent or for somebody to come in to help it, right? That's what's going on in here. But when I let down and I hit the first disco ball in this externalization, it has me then going, aha, it's your fault. And there are some really devious games that happen here. There's the logical fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is Latin for essentially, because this happened after this caused this, right? So because Y came after X, right, Y must have caused X. And so, for example, if you're sitting there and you're doing something that I say, quote unquote, annoys me, right? You're talking in a certain tone, you're talking about a certain topic that gets under my skin. You know, the example I've used before is like people playing music on public transportation. All of a sudden I'm like quaky and tight about it, as silly as that is. But when I'm looking at that disco ball of externalization, I am convinced in my mind, right? I'm kind of locked in to find the source of my agitation outside of myself. And the crazy and kind of sad and tragic thing about this is what may be happening, let's use that example of you playing your music on public transportation, is this inner part of me may sense in that, like that there's a freedom in you, right? That you are doing that. Maybe you kind of have a don't care attitude in that moment. You're just like, hey, I want to listen to my music. But me, I'm a little stiff about propriety and doing things the right way and respecting other people's space, right? And I'm using that as a justification to now judge you and condemn you and maybe even confront you in public transportation about it. But really, that freedom in you is singing out to the freedom in me, and that freedom in me is now maybe chirping a little more loudly, right? Wriggling a little more, saying, oh, I want to be free too. I want to be free too. But because I'm looking in the disco ball of externalization, I'm looking at you and I'm seeing literally my disturbance into you, and I think that you are causing that disturbance in me, right? That you are somehow introducing a disturbance into my field and that I was not previously disturbed, right? In other words, you are the cause of my suffering, as opposed to on a much deeper level, you being kind of the gift that's come to me to kind of bring to my attention the fact that I have unresolved suffering already inside of me. And when you quote unquote trigger me, what you're really doing is kind of gently bringing to my attention, hey, there's some stuff inside that still isn't worked out. Let's work it out through the heart. No, when we're playing the disco ball game, when we're externalizing, I'm now seeing you as the source of my suffering. And depending on how badly and desperately I want this to end, and how much nonsense I bought into already, this could be where I confront you. This could be where I assault you. This could be where I just sit in my chair and stew passive-aggressively and think nasty thoughts about you, right? All because from the get-go, I've essentially been misled to externalizing the issue instead of recognizing that it's all internal, right? All of it is internal. That my suffering is internal and my healing is internal, right? But instead, I'm seeing you as the problem and now trying to force you to fix it or taking out my pain on you and frustration, thinking somehow that will help me. Okay, so that's the first disco ball of externalization. Now, evil is a clever and resilient mofo. So evil's not done. We get past the first disco ball of externalization, right? Forget that little Freudian slip, please. You look past the disco ball of externalization and you realize, okay, I see evil at work there. I see that you had this little disco ball here that was going to try to point me off in other directions, but I know better. Right? I've played that game enough times. I've seen that it never leads to anywhere good. I'm going to recognize the disco ball of externalization for what it is, and I'm going to own the truth that this is inside of me. Evil goes, great. Oh my God, you are so smart. You figured this out. You're so wise. You realize that there's a demon inside of you. You realize that you're possessed. You realize that you've got some foreign invader. It's almost kind of like a tumor, a cyst, right? Some kind of unborn twin thing in there, something like that. Something bad, something wrong, something foreign. An invader lodged inside of you, right? Messing up you, right? And so I call this the disco ball of objectification. You might also call it the disco ball of elseness. Because what it's doing is, instead of getting me to realize the truth, which is this is an energy from my past, right? Deep past or recent past, maybe even past life, that wasn't processed through the heart, was instead trapped in the body. And so this is a living experience of myself, kind of almost like a gleam of light that's been trapped inside of this ice block. And that's me, right? As much me as I am. But that disco ball will tell me is no, it is, and then insert the boogeyman word that fits inside, right? Demon, dark angel, whatever it is, whatever our personal mythology is, whatever kind of calls out to us to see something as evil and wrong, worthy of punishment, worthy of confinement. That's what this will do. And so when we're then in the second disco ball of objectification or elseness, we will actually then hate this, right? Begrudge this. Maybe even if we're feeling magnanimous, just tolerate this, right? Have that kind of coexist mentality with this. That, hey, you're there, you're this evil thing. I want to pull you out by the root. I want to extricate you. I want to exterminate you. Okay, that's not working. I can't do it. I'll just put up with you and deal with you, but I'm constantly waiting for the moment and the opportunity to get rid of you and to get you out. You can tell here I'm speaking from some experience on this thought, because when you're looking into this second disco ball, that's what you're seeing, right? You're seeing a demon inside of yourself, essentially projecting some kind of darkness and wrongness into this. And if we're picturing this as being a trapped inner child energy, right? So this may have been 6 minutes into my life. I may have been 6 months old. I may have been 6 years old. This is me, right? This me who's now sitting here with the intention of addressing this is me as well. Is this thing going to come out of its shell and open itself and soften itself to me when I'm demonizing it? When I'm treating it as something else, something other, something wrong, something unwelcome, something terrible, right? All those things. Obviously not, right? It's going to probably lead to more coiling and hiding in here. More confusion may actually lead to new traumatizations and additional suffering. More disco balls, more game for fear, right? This is fear's game. This is fear's wheelhouse. This is where fear thrives, right? In this trapping pattern we do. And so it, through these disco balls, will constantly try to create more and more and more in others and in ourselves. And so it's no accident that it plays this game really well, and we'll just put whatever boogeyman idea we have, boom, projected onto this. And now, even though I'm looking inward, right, even though I've got past that first disco ball, I'm not healing because I'm being negative, right? If we could simplify it that way, I'm essentially closing my heart off to it and saying, you don't deserve my compassion, you don't deserve my affection, you don't even deserve my recognition of being me from the past. Right? I'm going to demonize you, or maybe again in my magnanimousness, tolerate you. But it's all going to be in some form of negativity, and the negativity will not heal this pattern. The negativity actually feeds the fear, right? So we're actually almost kind of pouring ourselves back into reinforcing the pattern when we're really trying to do is to undo it. All right, so if this was a young Padawan on the sandy planet of Tatooine, right now this is Luke Skywalker training in the bogs of, where did Yoda live? Dagobah system, right? But still not a full-on Jedi, right? Still mastering the Force. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to get more toward that Master Yoda status. We're trying to get now to the third disco ball. So we've got past the first disco ball, externalization. We know to look in instead of to look out. We've gotten past the second disco ball, right, which is objectification. We're not going to apply a negative framing toward this, right? Evil is not done. Evil goes, oh my God, you're so smart. You beat me. You beat me. Here's your crown. Here's your scepter. Here's your lightsaber. Whatever toy you want. Have fun. Enjoy it. And what we're going to do is we're going to fix this once and for all. Right? You beat me, and now I'm going to help you. What you need to come in to do is you need to be the hero. You need to come in and you need to fix. This is like your damsel in distress, or your princess locked in the tower. This is your, Samaritan by the roadside that you get to stop and help out, and then later tell great stories about it to your friends and to yourself to remind yourself what a good person you are. This is the disco ball of dramatization. And when I talk about drama, I like to use the triangle. suffering in the middle there. So the way I see drama working is suffering arises. The hero tries to battle the suffering, tries to make it go away, drive it off. The villain actually does a similar thing, except instead of trying to kind of defeat it or vanquish it, the villain tries to get rid of it by pushing it down onto the victim. Right? They just say, oh, I've had enough of this, right? They're doing the externalization game. Oh, I've had too much of this. I can't handle this right now. So they find someone that they think deserves it, and they push it off onto them. The victim then takes it, and then the reason the victim stays in the drama game is because the victim on a deep level believes they deserve it. Right? The victim believes, you know what, this suffering, it has finally found its home in me, this safe place. They almost will maybe kind of pull the suffering toward themselves. And then there's this weird combination of kind of self-loathing and self-pity that keeps the victim in a constant cycle. Now, when I'm using these terms here, what I'm not saying is like, let's look in society and identify the heroes, the villains, and the victims. I don't mean that at all, right? That's externalization. We inside of each of us have this drama dance, right? It's a pattern built into us. We are each our own hero. We are each our own villain. We are each our own victim. These are almost like masks that we put on, like those Greek drama masks. And we just put them on one after another, right? Because what do heroes do? They create villains, right? What do villains do? They create victims. What do victims do? They create heroes, right? Round and round we go in this cycle. But notice what's never happening. The healing is never happening in an open heart. The suffering is never being addressed and embraced for what it is. It's being battled, it's being spread, or it's being kind of hoarded, but it's never actually being processed and then let go through the open heart. And so this drama dance essentially takes us and keeps us trapped in trying to treat this as some kind of game to play, as opposed to a transformative process that's beneficial both for this past version of us and the present version of ourselves. And so I know for me, the dramatization tends to work, it appeals to my vanity and my ego, and it says, Joe, you get to be the hero now. You get to come in on your white steed, lift the visor on your helmet, say, aha, I see you past self from 6 minutes old, 6 months old, 6 years old, 6 minutes ago. I know what you went through. I feel your pain. This must be so awful. Don't worry, I'm here now. I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to come in, and I've got this white radiant light of goodness and virtue on me. I've got all these great techniques and great methods. And so I'm going to come in now, and I'm going to kind of fix you, right? I'm going to come in, and we'll take down this disbelief. We'll take down these disco balls. We'll chop them down off the roof. I'll grab this snake almost like Hercules on a quest, and I'll uncoil it, and I'll pull it off of you. And then we'll get to the core of things, and I'll grab you in my embrace and put you on my shoulder and take you home. And even as I'm saying that, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds great. Why don't I do that? And again, the problem is because it's kind of reinforcing the elseness. It's kind of doing an externalization game again. I'm treating this as something other than me, and I'm treating myself as better than it, right? It's in need of my rescue. It's in need of my help. Notice I keep using this word it, right? And this disco ball has a way of creating this subtle distance again between us and kind of locking me into a role instead of putting me into the space I want to be, which is the space of the open heart. The villain version of this, right, is I kind of come in and I basically treat this thing as my tormentor again, but I just use magnanimousness to kind of push through and to say, yes, I know you've been the cause of all my suffering, but I'm such a good person. I'm going to come in and I'm still going to go through the trials of fixing you, right? Even though deep down, what I'm really trying to do is to get rid of you. That's my subtle agenda. I'm going to go in maybe posing as the hero, wear that mask, while underneath it is the villain's mask. And when we get down here, maybe I'll take the hero mask off, say, screw you, I hate you for how you've hurt me, but hey, our time has come. I made it to the inner sanctum. Now you're out of here, right? That's a game I definitely play. The victim game is basically kind of sobbing my way in, self-pitying / self-loathing my way in, saying, oh, this is such a terrible sensation, such a terrible experience, so much confusion around it, right? When you get into this disbelief, I'll just tell you from experience, when I kind of with my attention approach that core of the fear, this is where the wildest theories come from, the absolute, and the way I can tell it's disbelief is when I check it against reality, it's always wrong. It's always saying what I know to be the opposite of the truth, but it says it so convincingly, and when you're in disbelief, when I'm in disbelief, it's kind of like being in its movie, and it's like my feelings match what it's saying, my mood matches what it's saying, kind of almost like this immersive VR, where it's really hard not to believe this thing, which I know in the light of day I'm going to recognize as some ridiculous nonsense. But when you're in that coil of disbelief, I think this is where a lot of our paranoia perhaps comes from. It's very convincing, and it actually takes a lot of willpower to remember what the truth is when you're kind of cooking in this pot. And so when I'm in the victim posture, I'll go and I'll just spiral in this for days and days, right? Years and years even for some of these things, where it's just like never getting to the core of it, never getting to the heart, but just spinning around all this nonsense, all these false leads, all these false thoughts, which is essentially this barrier that I set up to keep myself out. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So essentially that's the victim posture that I'm taking right when I'm going in, is essentially weeping my way in and hoping to heal that way. So now that I've talked about the 3 disco balls, and I've kind of gone through this last one, which is drama, I'm going to try to show what I think are wiser techniques that'll actually begin to dismantle this structure and allow for more freedom and healing. So let me go and lay that out. And I'm going to draw the symbol, which I had before, because really the answer is this, and all the words I put onto this are really just pointers going back to this. Opening the heart, being vulnerable, keeping that heart space open as much as we can, channeling our natural compassion. These, I think, are really the ways that this heals. The way you might picture that is you may picture the heart almost like a vibrator, word choice, a vibrating thing in the middle here, kind of pumping out almost like a speaker. And I think its vibrations are really what dismantles this structure. I don't think it's any act of willpower on our part, because again, that's going to be getting in the drama game. It's really about allowing the open heart to essentially call to this, and it will essentially from the inside dismantle its own structure. But it wants to answer to the heart. That's what it was looking for back in the past, right? Was the opportunity to be processed through the heart. And so now us coming in is just confusing, right? And again, we're playing the drama game, so we're not getting anywhere. But when the heart's vibrations are going, and it can feel the heart's vibrations, then it's almost like it feels that call, and it knows it's time to come home. It knows that it's a safe opportunity for it to come out of its shell, come out of its hiding, and seek healing. And so that, in a nutshell, is the point. Now, how do we open the heart, right? It's really easy to say. It's not as easy to do, especially if we haven't practiced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some techniques that I found particularly helpful. Some of these are ones I've gotten from other people. Others are ones I've kind of come up with more on my own. But just know that if you're feeling kind of buried in techniques or teachings and stuff like that, that really this symbol is the main thing. And so if you can meditate even just on this symbol of the open heart, that's likely to be much more effective than any technique that feels like it's a clever technique, a smart technique, something like that. Okay, so I just made some notes here. So the first technique is using a 3-step that recognizes the structure of what's going on here. And that 3-step is recognition, decognition, and opening the heart, right? So when we're sitting here and we can feel our disturbance and we're trying to figure out how to address it, what we can do is once we've gone through healing enough times, we can begin to recognize the disco balls. We can recognize the disco ball of externalization trying to point us off into someone or something else. We can recognize the disco ball of objectification or elseness trying to get us to demonize this confused energy inside of us. Or we can recognize this disco ball of dramatization trying to get us to fall into one of those roles. We don't need to fight them. We don't need to beat them. We don't need to outwit them. We don't need to play their game and beat them at their game. That's playing their game, right? There's no beating or defeating fear in fear's realm. The only thing we can do is recognize when the disco ball is operating and proceed, right? Recognition and proceed. And I'll just point out here, one of the themes that's going to emerge is, this structure here, it looks pretty devious. And in some ways it is, right? Again, this is constantly trying to misdirect us. This is trying to basically screw with our sense of what's real. I haven't talked much about the confusion. Let me just briefly hit on that here. The reason that this I'm calling confusion is because this is essentially trapped in time, right? It's trapped in some 6-minute-old version of me, the 6-month-old, right? The 6-year-old, or even just the 6 minutes ago. It's kind of trapped in the past. And so the reason it's confused is it's assessing current situations with the past mentality. So for example, if when I was 6 years or 6 months old, that's when I saw a big scary dog, right? And it spooked me, and that's what created this spark that I then trapped. If now I, as a 40-year-old person, go in and see a big dog, I may feel a flutter of fear, a flurry of fear. I may not know why, but what's happening is that old trapped energy from me is still stuck in that old mindset. And so it's not appreciating the fact that, hey, I'm 40 now, I have a bigger body, I can move, I'm aware of dogs, I can maybe look for where the owner is, right? All these different mechanisms for keeping myself safe. Things that I didn't have when I was 6 years or 6 months old, but I do have now. The reason it's confusion is, again, because it's trapped in that old mindset. It doesn't know to even look for those resources. It just immediately pulls the panic button and alarms fear, right? Essentially re-traumatizing the experience instead of using a more skillful approach. Okay, so the whole thing sounds devious, but the flip side of it is it's teaching us, right? It's teaching us. I like to call fear the dark sensei, because as much as fear messes with us and screws with us and can really cause outcomes in our life that feel ruinous and tragic, what it also does is when we begin to move into it, it teaches us the skills to essentially kind of discipline our minds and regain some of our sanity, which we lose as a result of being trapped in the past. And so the first tool or the first skill that fear is training as we go in is this skill of recognition, right? The skill of discernment. This ability to recognize in a moment, aha, I see what's happening here. I see the situation. I'm at the disco ball of externalization, right? It's trying to get me to blame this on someone else. Or I'm at the disco ball of objectification, trying to get me to demonize my inner energy. I'm at the disco ball of dramatization, right? Trying to get me to play some role, wear some mask. And again, we don't fight it. Right? That's the teaching, right? Don't play into fear's game. That's what fear is telling us. Don't play my game. I will beat you. Play your game. Be wise. Be smart. Be savvy. Recognize and move on. Right? Recognize and move on. Recognize and move on. So we recognize to get past the disco balls. Then when we get to disbelief, we decognize, right? And what I'm talking about there is essentially practicing the skill of not thinking. Because if we think here, disbelief takes that as kind of a kernel and then just will immediately twist it around into a nightmare. I think here of like the scene from Ghostbusters. Toward the end, the goddess is there and she's saying, okay, whatever you think of next will be the form that your destroyer takes, right? And Ray thinks of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and sure enough, that's what comes and attacks New York City. That's kind of how disbelief works in my experience. Whatever thought or urge or temptation comes to mind, it takes it and spins it around into some like Stephen King nightmare and just uses all kinds of lies and twisted truths and things like that to essentially deter me from continuing to go in. And I can try my ego techniques, right, which are to argue against it, to fight it, to reassure myself that I know the truth, right? Cling to my truths very tightly, repeat them as mantras, things like that, but that doesn't work. Why? Because that's really more scarcity, negative energy that I'm pouring back in. I'm trying to fight it, I'm trying to beat it, I'm trying to defeat it, I'm trying to wear it out. That's not what we do. Essentially, we cede the floor to fear, right? We respect fear. We say, fear, I recognize your disco balls, I don't want to fight, I just recognize. I get to your coil of disbelief, I decognize, I stop thinking, right? Now, stopping thinking can be a very difficult thing to do, especially if you have a lot of emotions going. And this is essentially what meditation can train us to do. And it's not necessarily getting us to cut off thoughts altogether. It's really a form of recognition followed by a re-engagement with the body in the present moment. So this would be, I'm sitting here, I've recognized the disco balls, I feel myself moving into that kind of paranoia realm, and I feel some thought come to mind. What I do is I just recognize that I've thought, and I reconnect with the body, right? I can reconnect through my breath. I reconnect. One I've been working with recently is literally like feeling my bones, right? I can move my feet, move my legs, move my arms. Notice that any firmness and stiffness in there is my bones. I can even try to, through sensation, see if I can sense my bones. And that all may sound kind of silly, and in a way it is. And I think the way it's working is it's getting me out of my head, getting me out of my speculative area, which is where disbelief can prey on me, and get me back into my space where things are very simple and very safe. Yeah, it's not as entertaining or fantastical as being up in my head, but I think that's what fear is really trying to teach me is, hey, get out of your dang head, or at least have the discipline and the ability to get out of your head when you know you want to. Because the only way you're going to get past this kind of gap into the core of where you're trying to go is essentially by not thinking, because any thought I have is again going to be turned into a new nightmare scenario and I'm going to be trapped. And so recognition for the disco balls, decognition for the disbelief, and then when we get into the confusion, this is where we use the technique of opening the heart. And the technique for opening the heart, again, this is one that you really need to discover for yourself what's going to be most effective. I know for me, generally, it's less is more, right? In fact, none, maybe most. And there's different techniques I can use to at least kind of reset and re-anchor the intention to open the heart. But opening the heart is really something that happens, and what we're doing is essentially kind of nurturing or fostering an environment for it to happen. It's kind of actually mirroring in a way, just as we're trying to get the heart to open, in a way you could think of this as kind of a clam that's closed, and we're trying to get it to slowly open its clamshell so that this trapped energy can come out. That same vibe that we're directing toward our heart is probably the same vibe we're directing here, which is a vibe of safety, a vibe of compassion, a vibe of patience, which is going to create a much more conducive environment for this to be willing to come out of its place of safety, its place of comfort. Even if it's a place of confinement, it's familiar with it. It doesn't really know, am I coming out to an enemy, and am I coming after that person who attacked me or demonized me? When we're coming in with that open heart energy, this, I think, is what's creating a condition of safety, which is going to allow this one to feel much more comfortable to emerge. And so one quote I like from the Persian poet Rumi is, "Be silent. Only the hand of God can remove the burdens of the heart." Be silent. Only the hand of God can remove the burdens of the heart. And if you're not a spiritual person, one way you may think of this is this up here, right? The head brain, the planning brain, the scheming brain, the rules and logic brain can't deal with this, can't handle this, right? Fear deliberately prevents that part from being able to come in. What fear is trying to train us to do is to use the brain here. Again, there's 40,000 neurons in the area of the heart. There's 100 million neurons in the area of the gut, right? This is the seat of love and knowing. This is the seat of intuition. These two are much more effective tools for helping to unravel this fear pattern than this one is. And so when we get into this inner space, right, we've used recognition, we've used decognition, and now we can literally feel that trapped energy kind of moving inside of us, kind of coming out of its shell a little bit. Remembering that from Rumi, be still. Only the hand of God can remove the burdens of your heart. It's an invitation to reconnect with the gut and with the heart in a very physical and literal level. See if we can feel into those spaces, right, and just kind of rest and reside there. And we could think of the vibe we want to have. This is kind of blending with another technique, which is remembering that what we have here is something akin to an inner child. And let's imagine that you went into a room, and what you wanted to do is you wanted to make this child feel safe to come out of the room when they want to, right? So we're not going to go in and grab them by the hand and pull them out of the room. And we're not going to sit there and look at our watch and say, okay, you have 10 minutes to come out of this room, do whatever you want in the meantime. We're saying, hey, you're going to come out of this room whenever you want to, right? And whether you come out of the room is really your choice, right? How, when, what manner, this is your decision. And what we want to do is we want to create a vibe that essentially lets them feel comfortable to make that decision on their own. And so one thought experiment you might have when you're in this space is, let's say that I was going into a room, but my mouth was taped shut, right? My eyes were taped shut and my hands were behind my back. And I'm in this room, and what I'm trying to do is to give this child a feeling of safety. I'm essentially trying to, without any words, right, any actual communication, communicate that vibe to this inner child of, hey, you can come out whenever you're ready. Whenever you feel safe, you can come out. That's what I want to try to communicate, but again, without using my words, without using my eyes, without using my hands. How do we do that, right? And that's that vibration again. That's that vibe we're putting out. That vibe of safety, that vibe of patience, that vibe of compassion, that vibe of the opening heart. And so the Rumi one I mentioned is one technique. This kind of hands and eyes and mouth shut and unavailable and yet you're still trying to communicate. That could be another technique we could use. Anchoring into the heart and the gut is another technique I mentioned. Just kind of going through my list here. Okay, another one is Reiki. So Reiki is energy healing passing through the hands. And essentially the idea behind Reiki healing is that all of us have the ability to allow healing energy to pass through our hands into ourselves or into others. And in Reiki, there's kind of a similar idea of less is more. We're not sitting here and we're not trying to do some spell or incantation or try to, channel our own inner heroism or something like that. We're really trying to get out of the way and allow the natural healing energy to pass through. And so you can use that same mindset here. If your fear, for example, this vibration is right here, you can lay hands on yourself in that spot and just hold them there. And what I think we want to notice here is the manner in which we apply the hands is really important, right? This is essentially how we're communicating with that energy inside of ourselves. So if we smack our hands on there, right, like that, or even if we kind of put them on and go, is this over yet? What message are we sending to that inner child, right? That we're in a hurry, that we don't want to wait any longer, that this should be over already, right? That's not going to get it to come out of its shell. We know how to put hands on a friend when a friend's in difficulty, right? We know even how to put hands potentially on ourselves when we're in difficulty, right? There's kind of a calmness, a gentleness to it. And so if we can put hands on the area of our disturbance, right, and do it in a manner that reflects our vibe of opening the heart, I think that's another technique that, again, prevents us from getting up in the head and trying to fix it, and instead tries to create a vibe to allow it to unravel and uncoil in its time. One other technique I've used is this notion of esh. And this is an abbreviation for me for energy and healing, and this S is kind of a pivot. It goes two directions. It means sharing and it means seeking. And so I use this to remind myself of the dynamic at play when I'm trying to do healing work on my fear. And that's that this is energy that's seeking healing, and it's energy that's sharing healing. Likewise, the 40-year-old person now who's trying to address an energy trap from my past, I am energy sharing healing, and I am energy seeking healing. And what I think this does, you've probably noticed, I continue to objectify this, right? Even calling it this, right? Even making a diagram about it is a form of objectification, right? And the way to heal is really to break down that notion, kind of blur the line here, and to really embrace the fact that this is not merely just a past version of myself trapped in here. This is me. This is as much me as I am. And if I can approach it with that level of respect and that level of appreciation, that level of affinity and intimacy, I think that really is some of the special sauce that allows this to happen really in a potentially beautiful and redemptive way. And so this energy sharing healing, energy seeking healing is something I can invoke to blur that line, because it's something that the inner energy and this outer energy can both say with equal truth. And so again, just like anything, we don't want to be, some esh, right? We can hear kind of a stridency or an urgency in that tone. That's more negativity. That's not going to create a real intimate connection. Esh may be something we just think and don't even say, or we just say it once, right? And we remember that it's seeking and it's sharing. We remember that it applies equally to the inner and the outer. And I think this is another way to open the heart, to break down some of these pretenses and barriers, and to create more of an intimate environment that can lead to real healing. I know this one works particularly well for me. Okay. So let me just lastly show what I see as the end result of this process, right? What the healing would look like, and why it really, I think, ultimately ends up being a gift. Why the people who have done healing work and really reached the other side. And what I'll say for myself is, I think I'm kind of in the middle of the process, right? I think I've begun healing work in earnest. I do think I've released a lot of trapped energy inside of myself, but I can still sense a lot of trapped energy inside myself. And so what I'm sharing is essentially the techniques that I found are helpful so far for me. I hope my abilities on this evolve. And so when I talk about what the end result looks like, it's based really not on my own experience as much as my sense of what others have gone through, but it is in some sense of my own experience based on the limited healing I've done, because I do feel this dynamic start to be at play. So you might say I don't see myself as being finished with this process, but I do think I made progress So what I'm about to share is a little bit of me, but really a lot more of kind of people that I really think have made the crossover and taken the healing to the next level. So the two analogies I'm going to use here are like a bowl that has like a shard missing out of it, and then something like the ocean and a drop, right, that's outside of the ocean. And the bowl here would represent the person in the present moment, right? Me, for example, at 40 years old. And then that missing shard would represent that inner child energy that's trapped, right? Something from the past. Likewise here, the ocean would be representing the current being. And then this little drop would represent the aspect of the being or the part of the being that's trapped in this fear pattern instead of being able to flow with the whole. And what I think we begin to see happen gradually during the process, and then hopefully at the end of the process in its entirety, is essentially a restoration or a redemption where this piece that was missing is returned to the whole system, and it benefits both the piece, the system, and then kind of creates the third, which is the merging of the two. It actually creates a new being or a transformation that is both the sum of the parts and in some way more than the sum of the parts, because there's now a wholeness and a synergy in the being created by the redemption that there wasn't before. And so for going back to this bowl example, if we're picturing this as that shard, right, that little piece that's missing, we know that this bowl, when we pour water into it, can maybe only handle water up to this level. If I try to fill my bowl up to here, it's going to start spilling out. Why? Because that shard is missing from me. And so I'm going through life constantly kind of bleeding out opportunities, bleeding out intimacy, bleeding out affection, whatever I'm missing. It's likely because there's some shard or some piece of me that's trapped inside my fear, and I'm unable to be my whole, complete, and best functioning self because that's not there. And so this healing process, this is why that drama triangle really doesn't make sense, because the healing process isn't me just rescuing, again, like some damsel in distress, and then going back and I'm some fixed being that just goes around the countryside doing this again and again and again because I'm some hero or some great thing. I'm trying to kind of regather the broken pieces of myself and reassemble myself for the current and future benefit of myself and the people I love and the people I come into contact with. I'm trying to be a bowl that doesn't leak and bleed my stuff all over the place. And so one by one, I go through and I try to find those missing shards, right, those missing pieces in me, and bring them back into the whole, right? Or going to the ocean metaphor, right? To be at my fullest flow, right? To have my full capacity. Even these droplets, or maybe even some rivers that have gone off, if they don't have their connection to the ocean, that water is never able to flow. They're not able to be refreshed, and this ocean's not at its fullest, right? Through the healing process, we allow for the reclamation, right? The redemption, the reunion, which then creates fullness, creates harmony, right? Now the bowl, because it's been reconnected with its shards, and what I think is beautiful here is it's not like the bowl goes back to its original unbroken state. The bowl will still have the outlines of those shards, but I like to picture, I know there's an image I've seen on the internet of like gold kind of laced in there where the shard was replaced. That's what I think you really have at the end of the healing process, is a bowl that isn't pretending it was never broken, right? Is actually grateful to be rehealed, grateful to be restored, is able to be a fully functioning bowl because, again, it's got all those pieces that were causing its leaking back in place. And now those little pieces which are sitting here saying, what am I? Right? Well, what is life? What's going on here? Why do I feel like some broken little piece? Why do I feel separate from my wholeness? Why do I sense that I'm part of something bigger, but I don't feel that way. I don't seem that way. I just feel like some little shard buried in my own ribs or buried in my throat, buried in my stomach somewhere. Something about this metaphor really speaks to me, and I think that's what this is the present self and the past self having their reunion, right, in the present moment through this notion of Esh, and able in a way then to heal here, and then create this third kind of co-creation, this synergy. And that's when I think you see people who are truly transformed by the healing process, people who go forward and are now able to walk the earth in something akin to an unconditional peace, an unconditional gratitude. I don't want to oversimplify it. I think people who've even done very deep healing still struggle. But I think by and large, you can see some people who really have gone through the other side and they're just not how they were anymore. They're not as scared, they're not as neurotic, they're not as hung up in the past, they're not as defensive. They're able really to be present in the moment, to share their gifts with the world, and they really don't expect anything in return. And I think that's what this wholeness, especially this redeemed wholeness, allows one to feel, because you've been into the depths of your fear, so you don't really fear anymore. Fear still hurts, but you're not as afraid of it because, again, you've actually seen the way fear trains you and teaches you to be a better person. And then you've seen how at the end of that road of fear, you actually find a piece of yourself that was missing, that when you restore it allows you to be whole, allows that piece to be whole again, and then allows even a new version of yourself to merge, which is the combination of the two. And just one last little piece on that. I think another way you can look at it is like energy in the body system. So we have this energy that's trapped, say down here in the gut. And when it's in there, it's not able to be in the flow of energy around and through the body, right? This is kind of like the river that allows the water to prevent from getting stagnant, right? To get full of mud or algae or anything like that, to get gunked up. When things get stuck, they get gunked up, right? And so this energy here may be kind of dark, it may be kind of decrepit, it may be kind of stiff, it may be kind of weak. But when that energy is invited to come out of its stagnation and back into the flow of what is, that energy is then able to, it's almost like a dog that's been in isolation coming back to the herd or coming back to the pack, right? That drop of water that's been on its own, finally reconnecting with its ocean, this energy can swim again, right? This energy can be free again. This energy can catch up, right? It can go, oh, okay, I'm not 6 months old anymore. I'm a 40-year-old man now. Here's my life situation. Here's what's going on. Let's do this, right? Hey, I can handle seeing a big dog now. I don't get scared of it anymore. I think it does that by essentially reconnecting with all the other energy. The other energy welcomes it back as a brother that's been lost and kind of gets it back up to speed, gets it into the vibe, and then it's now no longer a separate piece apart from the rest. It's blended into the whole energy field like everything else is. And so this kind of whole flowing energy field, I think, is kind of akin to this bowl, which can handle water all the way up to its brim because it has the wholeness that it didn't have before. Okay, let me just look at my board, see if there's anything else I wanted to put on here. Nope, I think that's it.